All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being with us wherever you are. And also, thank you for sharing this because a lot of people listen to this later. And so I just want to thank everyone for being a part of our life journey, mine and Mark's today, and really sharing the latest, greatest in medicine, discoveries, new things, there's something new happening all the time. And that's why I recently updated my book, Cancer Revolution. And because that book was written in 2017, and then we updated it, and that came out like what, 4 or 5 months ago. I lose track of time. And but there's just constant updates. And so I'm always, as you guys know, I'm a crazy reader, researcher. And I forgot where I even read about you, Mark, but I read and I'm like, oh, okay, let me just go see what someone else that's not a doctor thinks about medicine from their lens. Okay. And I'm like, he comes from business. So, like, that's a whole nother, perspective. And so I read his book called Upside Down Medicine, The End of Upside Down Medicine. And I've been trying to bring an end to upside down medicine for a very, very long time. Everyone knows it's my 40th year of practicing medicine. And, the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. And that it makes it so exciting to come to work because I am in awe of the miracle of the human brain. And so, but this book is written about a lot of different things. Okay. It talked about basically the problem. And I think everyone today knows about the problem in health today. Okay. We don't have health, we have sick care instead of health care. And so he dedicated this book to those who want to take responsibility for their health. And you know what? I always say self-care is the new healthcare. So I told people all the time, I really don't know of a doctor that I could really go to. Yes, I have some good friends who are my level, my stage, my age of life and everything. But there's not that many doctors that I'd really like discuss what's going on because they don't have the toolkit, they don't have the depth of understanding of how the human, whole system works. And so, and then it's, a lot of people think that, oh, they just believe what they hear and what they are told instead of doing their own research. And really, I tell everyone that comes into our clinic, question everything. Everything, even me. I go, question me because that's how I'm going to get better. And so Mark does a great job of start questioning a lot of things that we thought. Like we thought COVID was a virus. Okay. And we come to find out it's not a virus. Okay. So, and he goes in that in his book and he talks about not only COVID viruses, but other viruses. And this is not the first time that I've read that. And you can prove whether there's virus. And then I think what's even more stunning is how do we really even create a vaccine? Like, how does that even process based on Koch's postulates? And so like there's just so much to be questioned. And what is wrong with questioning? Because that's how we find discoveries. And it's not an accusatory thing. It's not like we're trying to be we're not trying to be destructive of the medical profession and the medical journey. We're trying to make it better. So if we don't continually ask questions and continually try to discover, how are we going to make changes and how are we all going to get better personally and collectively? And so anyway, and the beautiful thing, he has a great index, but and bibliography and all that kind of good stuff. So, like, if you wanted to go do your own homework, you can. So, I I know you worked in Silicon Valley, you went to Princeton, you worked in business. So, you've been in the business side of the world, which is great and wonderful because you guys have minds of like, okay, how do we make a product? How do we make money? How do we make, things work and make it better for the people, the stockholders, and the people who, provide the funding for a business to grow. And so, Mark, why don't you tell people your journey, from Princeton and your degree, and then how you got into Silicon Valley? And because everything is about, why you're doing what you're doing now.
hmm Yeah, well, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm excited to have this conversation. After Princeton, I worked in investment banking in New York, but I went into it not because I had a passion for investment banking, but rather because I didn't know what else to do. And many of my classmates, when I graduated in 2008, the most coveted jobs were in investment banking or strategy consulting. And because my orientation was to go toward whatever seemed to be the most prestigious thing, that's where I devoted my energy. My degree was in psychology, and I wrote my senior thesis on behavioral economics. Daniel Kahneman's work, he won a Nobel Prize for his work on prospect theory. So I was blending business elements with psychology. I actually started off in the uh, economics department with a finance certificate, which is the equivalent of a minor, and I decided to drop all of it to switch to psychology. So I almost
Well,
had the businessy stuff actually as a degree, but I decided not to do it because I felt too theoretical, and I wasn't enjoying it as much. The psychology I enjoyed because I wanted to understand human behavior, and there's so many fascinating elements. And when I went to investment banking in New York, it didn't really, the psychology didn't really apply too much. And because I was there during the financial crisis of 2008, it was a particularly
oh,
hectic time.
wow.
I joined the firm is UBS, so one of the large investment banks, and it was summer of 2008. So I caught the wave of everything that happened through the fall of 2008 with Lehman Brothers and everything else. I left in 2010. It was torture.
I bet.
I barely slept. There was a lot of pressure. Of the people that joined the bank with me that summer, I think it was around 10% of them were fired within the first few months just because all the banks were downsizing.
Right.
So there was a lot of pressure and it wasn't really fun. And I give this context because it was the beginning, probably not the very beginning, but part of the beginning of doing things in life without having a bigger purpose behind it. And that over time becomes impossible to do. As
I,
I learned. So when I left the bank in 2010, I joined a firm. It was a spin out of the Boston Consulting Groups, which is one of the most prestigious consulting firms. And some of the top partners there decided to form another firm focused on advising companies with regard to their intellectual property, often pertaining to their patented technologies. And this would mean a company would have important innovations and they'd want to know what to do with their business, what to do with the actual patents, how they should adjust their technology. So I learned a lot about the law, technologies, and business strategy, which I had more familiarity with. And this is important context for where we're headed because in this industry, where I spent 10 years and eventually became a partner at the firm, I had to learn about new technologies, new industries, new medical devices, anything with innovation. It's basically every industry out there. I would have to learn about it and become enough of an expert to be able to communicate that to a board of directors or to a senior management team as I was evaluating what was going on. So I became just accustomed to having to look at new things and learn quickly and then be able to translate it in simple terms, which has helped me in my writing process. And the other thing that's really important about the world of patents is that in order to get a patent granted, by definition, legally, the innovation has to be deemed both novel and non-obvious relative to a person having ordinary skill in the art. This is something new. It's novel and non-obvious. That
Mhm.
means every patent is going against the grain. This is what the industry says, and this is how we are transcending what the industry has been doing. So I also became very accustomed at people who were challenging paradigms and seeing where the patterns were in paradigms that had been accepted for a long time, but were missing something.
Mm.
And that has been very useful in my work and probably it has really adjusted my perspective on how to look at everything. And fast forward to several years into my time at this firm, I was based in San Francisco for most of it. I was in Boston for a little bit. I had a life crisis, basically. I was working really hard at this firm. The good thing about being in a smaller organization is that there's more responsibility, and also the negative is that there's more responsibility. So I was doing everything, and I was working with clients that were sometimes very distressed. And there was this, what I call the Great Patent Recession that many people have not heard of. Many people have heard of the Great Financial Recession of
Right.
2008. There was a patent recession in that it became more difficult for patent owners to defend their patented technologies against infringing companies.
Whoa.
So that means big companies could steal from little guys.
Wow.
And that means if you own a patent, it's less valuable. And that affected everything in my business. So that was distressing for me as a perfectionist who wanted to win. And then also, there were things in my personal life that weren't going the way that I wanted. And generally, I felt like I didn't have a sense of meaning or purpose. And I believed that life was fundamentally random and meaningless. Random and meaningless. So, meaningless, as in, I can create meaning in my own mind, but
Mm.
there's no meaning built into the fabric of reality itself. Versus another perspective that one might call more spiritual, where there's a natural order or things are happening for a reason and you
Yes.
have purpose. That was off the table for me. I was atheist, agnostic, living this life where I was very unsatisfied and had been on a treadmill and was sprinting and was not really getting anywhere. So I hit a wall. Some would call that a dark night of the soul. I was turned 30 and just was a zombie. Didn't know what to do. I was still going to work, but I didn't really want to be doing it anymore because I wasn't satisfied. And I started listening to podcasts. A friend forwarded me a podcast of a venture capitalist on Tim Ferriss's show, and I just started listening to podcasts because that was something to do. And podcasts were newer at the time to be able to take in content like that. And I started listening to alternative health shows, people thinking about mental health differently and psychedelics and new ways of treating cancer. I remember hearing about that. So I was just stimulated to hear about these ideas that I didn't know anything about. And that took me to the summer of 2016, where on a show, it's called Extreme Health Radio. I had been listening to it for a little while, and I just went to the next interview that was up. And it was from months prior with a woman named Laura Powers, who was talking about using psychic abilities to heal her clients. And she spoke about angels and beings that are non-physical and stuff that was just sounded like science fiction to me. And I
Mhm.
was struck by the fact that the hosts of the show, who I had heard on so many other episodes, who seemed to be pretty discerning or at least intelligent, they were taking her seriously. So I had a lot of cognitive dissonance. This woman is speaking about the nature of reality in a way that completely contradicts my worldview. And these people who I respect seem to believe her. Okay, what's going on here? And I listened to the whole episode, and Laura mentioned her own podcast. It's called Healing Powers. I proceeded to devour that podcast. I listened to every episode from 2016 back to 2011, which was when the podcast started. And I heard person after person talking about psychic abilities, the notion of an afterlife. And some of them were scientific, others were people who were experiencing this stuff. And it was the quantity of this information, of people from different walks of life, different backgrounds, coming to a very similar conclusion about the nature of reality. And it was not random and meaningless. It was a reality in which there is order and purpose and something spiritual. So that led me on the journey where we are today, 10 years later, of I became obsessed. I wanted to read books. I wanted to read all the scientific papers. And the more I learned, the more I realized that there was some validity to this more spiritual concept. And actually, my belief system, this more atheistic, agnostic perspective, had many flaws, and there were holes that I could not explain. So that led me to write my first book. It's called An End to Upside Down Thinking. I wrote it in the summer of 2017. It was published in 2018. And it's about the idea that the brain does not produce our consciousness, but perhaps the brain is like a receiver or some kind of a filtering mechanism, a transducer, receiving and transmitting, something
Yeah,
like that.
that's right.
And I put the evidence into one place. That my goal was, as someone coming from the business world, I was hoping to appeal to people with my sort of background. And there are hundreds of citations, and I wanted to put all the best evidence. So I talk about a chapter on the science of telepathic abilities and near-death experience and precognition and children who have memories of another life. And this is studied at the University of Virginia at their medical school, the Division of Perceptual Studies. I was citing Princeton University's Pear Lab, the Engineering Anomalies Research Lab, which was run by the Dean of Engineering there. And I was citing the US government's declassified documents talking about the reality of this stuff. And I was citing the Institute of Noetic Sciences, which has been around for over 50 years, scientifically studying this with peer-reviewed research. And now I'm a board member there. So this blew my mind, and I had to share it with people because I thought it was so important. And then I said, okay, great. I figured out something really important. I'm going to go back to my job. My buddy from high school actually is in the world of media and podcasting. He said, let's turn this into a podcast. I did 50 interviews with some of the top scientists and experiencers. I interviewed Brian Josephson, Nobel Prize winner in physics, professors at the University of Virginia, high class people. And we created an 8 episode series. It's called Where is My Mind? It's like an audio docuseries. And it's still available on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. That took me to the end of 2019, early 2020. I was still in my job, made it to partner in my early 30s. I was in a great position. And I thought to myself, I don't want to do this. I
Mm.
can't spend any more time and energy, even if it's not as much time and energy now because I was more senior. It felt like it was taking away from my bigger purpose or something. So I made a decision to leave the firm without having backup, meaning I didn't know what I was going to do next. And long story short, there are now 7 books on a variety of topics, including medicine, but I go into politics and economics and cosmology, lots of different things. And they're all titled a similar thing, an end to upside down something. I give credit to my publisher, the late Bill Gladstone. When I wrote my first book, he said, I love this book, and the title is going to be An End to Upside Down Thinking. And he was involved in the Chicken Soup for the Soul books and the For Dummies books. So he had this
Yeah.
mindset of a
Yeah.
series. And I was like, Bill, I'm not going to write another book. But he knew. So I kept that title and changed the last word. So An End to Upside Down Medicine, for example. And with regard to this topic of medicine, it was on my mind long before I wrote this book in 2023, An End to Upside Down Medicine, because when I got on this more spiritual path, I started to work with alternative practitioners, changing my diet, helping gut issues that I had had with acupuncture and diet, for example, and Reiki, and all these different modalities that I never would have even thought of before. They seemed to have efficacy, and I was feeling better. So it was on my mind for sure. And then everything happened in 2020. And that introduced new questions about germs and how scared should we be of them? And what is an immune system? Why do some people go to a party and get sick and why do others not? And should we be injecting ourselves with this cocktail that's going to help prevent us from getting sick? And as we all remember, there were many different opinions on this. So I started to go really deep in 2020. And when I realized that the mainstream allopathic medical system, which is the primary way of thinking about medicine in the West today, I realized that there are many assumptions within that way of thinking that are unfounded. And they're taken for granted to be true. And then basically industries are built on top of them. So I wanted to expose the holes in these assumptions with the goal of trying to better understand the determinants of health and disease. That's really what I'm interested in. I'm not a clinician, but I'm interested at the foundations. We inhabit this human body. Why are we healthy? Why are we sick? And when I
Mm.
ask that question deeply, what I realize is that many people in the medical profession don't really know the answer to that because we don't fully understand what a human body is and how complex it is. And we have inferences that sometimes can lead to treatments that seem to work sometimes, but there's a lot missing. So I wanted to lay out what those issues are in the hopes that other people would look at those foundational issues and then build on it. So, for context for your audience, I tend to be more and more interested in falsifying ideas that have been presented. I'm more interested in that than saying, I know this other thing is true with certainty.
Mhm.
And it's actually an appropriate or an acceptable approach. Because when a claim is put forth by an industry or by a profession, we can evaluate that claim. And if there's something that contradicts the claim, we can say, well, that thing's not true. That doesn't require us to have a replacement.
Right.
And a lot of what I do in the book is talk about the holes and I talk about possible replacements, but I don't feel I know enough to say I know exactly what the determinants of health and disease are. And I'll pause there.
Yes. Yeah. And I guess I want to ask you though, like, what do you think in all your research? Because you've been on this since 2000, well, 8, and then but 17 is with the upside down thinking, right?
Mhm. That's when I wrote the book. Yeah.
Right. And so what would you say now, we're in 2026, what do you think is the most outlandish thing that you have discovered about the conventional medical paradigm?
For me, it has to do with the notion of a virus. And a virus is a very specific medical definition, which
Correct.
is it's an obligate intracellular parasite. It's
Right.
this thing that gets inside of your cell and it replicates, and then it bursts out of the cell and then goes into another cell and does the same thing. And in this process, it causes physical symptoms in a biological organism like a human, and then is able to jump from one organism to another one and do the same thing. Very specific definition. And no one has ever observed what I just described.
Right. So why don't you talk to everyone though how that even came about? Because I think that is what's really a whole fallacy is like it's never, like you said, it's never ever been proven.
Right. And there are parts of the chain that I mentioned where scientists will observe something and then make an inference that it's a
Yes,
virus. But
right.
what I described of observing a virus from start to finish, no one's ever seen it. And for scientists who claim to be so skeptical, the first thing you'd want to do, I would think, is to observe the thing you claim exists.
Yes.
And they haven't done that.
No.
But if we go back in the history, and that's when I was writing this book, sometimes when I get into a topic, I'm not sure if it's book worthy. This one, I was really not sure. But I had to research it, and I realized that I didn't know much about the history of medicine. And I spoke to some of my friends who are doctors, and I realized they didn't either.
That's true.
Because in med school, they'll say, well, yeah, we just heard about those studies that were done 100 years ago, and we never looked at them. We just assumed they were true. So, for example, Louis Pasteur looking at rabies, which we know there are symptoms when people get bitten by a dog, but there was a belief that there must have been something transmitted from the dog to the person, making the person sick.
Mhm.
But they didn't have technology to be able to observe something as small as a virus as it is allegedly. So they just assumed, well, it's a virus. And this was kind of the way of thinking of, well, there must be something that's transmissible as a pathogenic organism that's being transmitted. So for a long time, this word virus has had many meanings throughout history. It's meant slimy poison, for example. It comes from the Greek word eos. So
Yeah.
there's a notion of something that's causing illness. But the question that I asked has been around for a long time. People get sick and sometimes they die from the symptoms. Why is it happening? So scientists and doctors have been for a long time trying to come up with a materialistic explanation of something physical, because science these days tends to be based on the physical. And it sounded, I guess, okay to people like Louis Pasteur. Well, there must be something so small we can't see that's being transmitted.
Correct.
Then fast forward to the early 1900s. Around 1930 was the advent of the electron microscope. Then it became more prevalent in the subsequent decades, where you could actually see things that were as small as viruses are alleged to be, which is much smaller than bacteria, by the way. So the viruses are really, really tiny. But think about that. Before the electron microscope, anyone talking about a virus as something that's a pathogenic entity is unobserved. But then the electron microscope comes along, and at least you can observe really small things. But the question is, just because you can observe something small, do you know that that small thing is a virus that's
Right.
invading host cells, replicating, causing disease, and being transmitted to other organisms? And it would be it's a very simple process, you'd think, if you wanted to demonstrate that a virus exists, is you find a sick organism and you take the virus out of that organism. And then you could study the virus. And
Right.
you could even run studies where you put that virus into other organisms and see if they get sick, but you would need to have the virus itself first. And this is the fundamental problem that I could not believe when I researched, and I still can't believe it. And there's this term virus isolation that I was hearing in the COVID era. Well, the SARS-CoV-2 virus has been isolated. What does it mean to isolate a virus? The word isolation in every other context except virology means to separate one thing from all other things. And Dr. Tom Cowan has made a very simple analogy here. If you wanted to isolate a hammer from a toolbox, you would take the hammer out of the toolbox, and then you can study and characterize the hammer. It's that simple. That is not what virus isolation is, even though the term is used. Virus isolation comes from a study in 1954 known as Enders and Peebles. Those are the authors of the study. And they came up with a method of isolation using a cell culture. And I'm going to simplify this very dramatically. There was a measles patient, meaning someone who was sick with symptoms that they called measles that they assumed came from a virus. And they took fluids from the sick person and partially filter. Often they partially filter those fluids, and then they put those fluids into a soup of material. It's called a cell culture. And this has all sorts of stuff in it, like monkey kidney cells, antibiotics. It's a cocktail of stuff. So you take
Well,
these things from fluids from a sick person, put it into the soup. And if the cells break down in the soup after adding fluids from a sick person, they say, well, we isolated a virus because there must have been a virus in the fluids from a sick person, and that's what caused cells to break down in the soup. Therefore, we've found the virus. That's why the person has these symptoms that we call measles. And we can study everything from there. We can now look under an electron microscope and point to a certain thing and say that's the virus. And later on, with genetic studies, we can do sequencing and so forth. But the problem is, how can you know that anything studied afterwards is of a virus if you don't have just the virus first? If you have other cellular material or other types of materials, you can't. You can look under an electron microscope, which, by the way, is a very complicated process. You're not looking at just the pure sample because you have to tamper with the sample. You have to stain it with resin and slice it up, basically. So that these images, if your audience is looking online right now and saying, well, I see a picture of this virus, what is that picture of? How do you know that that thing that's a static image, it's not moving around like a virus is allegedly doing. How do you know that that image is of a thing that's supposed to be getting inside of host cells as a parasite, causing disease and so forth? You don't. And the same thing goes for anything like genetic sequencing. How do you know that the sequencing exercise is taken from viral material versus something else? Dr. Mark Bailey from New Zealand says it's genetic material of unknown provenance. You don't know the origin of those genetic sequences if you don't have just the virus. And you can apply this to anything else. Um, an antigen or antibodies, things that are allegedly tied to viruses. Well, if you don't have the virus first, how do you know those other things are tied to the virus, which makes testing very complex? And antiviral drugs, for example, just because a drug makes someone better in terms of their symptoms going away or reduced, how do you know that the mechanism is that it's killing the virus?
right,
We know that radiation and chemotherapy can kill cancer in some ways. Is that because they're directly targeting the reason the cancer's there? No, there's another mechanism involved that has nothing to do with the root cause of cancer, for example. So you could have a drug that's called an antiviral that happens to have certain qualities in terms of stopping metabolic activity, for example, but it's
right,
not stopping a virus. So this is the rewiring that I'm hoping to encourage with your audiences. We're told things that are linked back to a virus, and we have to ask, how did they come to that conclusion? And they could not have come to a proper conclusion without having a virus isolated first. And the kicker for me, when I knew I could write the book, I think, was when I heard about the work of Christine Massey, a woman in Canada who's been working with colleagues around the world. They have been submitting freedom of information requests to health organizations like the
right,
CDC, countries all over the world, and they asked very specific questions. Please show me any records of, you name it, virus X, where it's not being put into a cell culture first and you're making inferences, very specific. And every time they say, we have no records of this. And one case that I cited from a health organization in Canada, they say, we have no records because you're asking us to violate the gold standard of virus isolation in virology, which is
yeah,
basically proving the point. So that was big for me. As a researcher, someone who wanted to present credible information, the health organizations around the world are admitting they don't have a truly purified sample of a virus just by itself. And this is why it's so important, because in the scientific method, you need to have an independent variable, meaning there's something you introduce into the study to see the effects. With the
right,
virus, it's very simple. You'd want to introduce a virus into an organism, let's say, and see what happens. But if you don't have a virus by itself, if you don't have an independent variable, you can't actually run a scientific study properly, and then you can't run a proper control if you don't even know what the independent variable is, because it's not a truly independent variable. So that means, by definition, the scientific method is not followed in the field of virology, rendering it, by definition, pseudoscience.
right.
And that's really the
The
big bomb.
crux of the whole, yeah, no, and this is because when I read your book, these are all things that I've been reading for a long time, but for everyone listening, Mark kind of puts it, step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, talking about how it all started. And here you have this big soup of, all this stuff. Well, how do you know? Like, what is what? If you mix all those monkey cells, this kind of all this whatever it is altogether, how do you know that there really is a virus? Okay. And so, and like you said, I heard about Christine Massey's work about many people have requested from FOIA, Freedom of Information Act, to like send it to me. I want to know. I want to, understand this sequencing of this virus. Well, no one has had it. And that I've read that many, many times. And so then the question is, how worldwide was there a mass hysteria against something that doesn't exist?
Right. The question is an important distinction. It's the distinction between epidemiology, which is a patterns of illness in society, versus the cause of illness.
Mm-hmm.
So just because a lot of people are getting sick doesn't tell us why they are getting sick.
Right.
I'll give another example from Dr. Cowan. He says, imagine we put a bunch of rat poison in a basement and we come downstairs and all the rats are dead. And someone walks in there who doesn't know it was rat poison and concludes, oh, there was a virus that killed all the rats.
Right.
There could be other common exposures
Right.
that can cause people to get sick, whether they are environmental toxins, nutritional issues, EMFs, psychospiritual issues, things happening in the person's psyche. There are many reasons that people can get sick. And in my research of this, it seems to me that disease, as we call it, is often multifactorial. It's not just one thing. It just put everything on a virus is a very simplistic way of looking at things.
Yeah, there's too many nuances to the
Exactly.
human miracle. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting because I remember in 2020, and when it was announced March 15th, and that, we have a crisis. And in May 2020, I had a town hall. An organization had a town hall pandemic where we talked to everyone about what was going on and exactly what to do. I talked about prevention. Another doctor talked about a antibiotic treatment protocol. And then the other doctor talked about, he was an intensive care unit specialist. But we talked about what to do right then and there. So that was within 2 months. But that was not even acknowledged. Okay. So that was before, really before it got, even worse and worse. And I think, what happens is a paradigm, a thought, an algorithm, a philosophy, whatever you want to say is, here is what we do with X. Okay. Not how do we prevent everything. Okay. Because right now we can prevent the top 3 killers right now. The first is doctors and errors. The second is heart disease. And the third is cancer. But we know, there's too much information now. We're living in an era of information. And in my big practice, I don't have 1 heart attack a year. So how is my practice exempt? No, it's not exempt. It's just that what we're telling people to do and whatever we're recommending, and we don't really use a lot of medications, we aren't absolved from the process,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so, but how does when we, and I know we go by random, we go by randomized clinical trials, double blind, but that means that we reduce everything to one possibility, this one drug, maybe this one exercise, maybe this one food, but just one thing. So here, Mark, take this medicine for heart disease, and we're going to follow you over the next 5 years. But life can't be based on one thing, because what did the person do the other 23 hours and 15 minutes? Okay.
Hmm.
because, the greatest predictor of illness is what we eat and our lifestyle. Well, our lifestyle is our 24-hour day. Okay. But we know that, but that is not implemented in the medical, like the medical treatment protocol. And I always wonder, like, how does this happen with, we know these, people are like now are fascinated with weight loss peptides. Okay. But most people can't even get the sleep, water, eating, exercise, sunshine right. Okay. You want a peptide, but you can't even get those things right. There's no peptide that's going to, replace those basic foundational, like you said earlier, natural laws, the natural order of things. You have to retain natural order of existence because that is what really can determines, what's going to happen. All right. And probably in the 40 years that I've been working, when I went to school a long time ago, like we learned psychiatry
Mm.
and we learned like that was one of our rotations besides, internal medicine and family practice and all that. But in psychiatry, like we never ask, like, do you have stress? Did you have trauma? Did you have whatever? We just go, oh, you're depressed, so you need ECT, or you need, there were old drugs back then, or you need electroconvulsive therapy, or, things like that. But we never ask, like, tell me about your life. And now, like, I think about those archaic times. I was like, wow, what was going on? And I always think about the story of Dr. Semmelweis. Do you know the Hungarian doctor? And he said that we need to reduce infections in postpartum parent mothers, right?
Hmm.
And I tell everybody the story because it is a stunning reminder of kind of where we are now. Is Dr. Semmelweis said, "Oh, we're having too many infections postpartum. I have a great idea. We're going to wash our hands. And that's how we're going to reduce infection." And everyone, his wife was a doctor, and everyone said, you're crazy and we're going to commit you. And that's a true story. And that took another 80, 100 years, okay, to implement hand washing, not when I learned you wash up to your elbows for 20 minutes with betadine with the brush and everything. That's how before you go into an operating or before you deliver babies, okay? And I'm like, we need to all take a moment and say, okay, we got to listen to our fellow man. Maybe there's some truth and validity instead of trying to disintegrate the person and dehumanize him and basically say he's full of it and he's crazy. Because some of the most obvious things are not so obvious. And so, and here we are now, I feel like in 2026 now, because I've been saying it's a 911 for about 10 years now. And no one's, it's like the girl who cried wolf. And I feel like, okay, wait, now I do think people are listening. I do think young people are listening now. Okay. I really do. Not that I don't have older patients that listen. Because I have amazing patients, I have amazing people. Like we have an incredibly amazing community, and they are really questioning the medical paradigm and the medical recommendations and looking for another way. And so my community is very different, and I think it is growing. I think when you get a family member who is ultra conventional and they go, "Oh my God, how could you be doing that?" Like that is the craziest thing. You have a brain tumor and you're not going to let the doctor fix you. Like, what are you thinking?
Hmm.
Instead of, if you've got cancer, this started 10 years ago. So you just need to take a breather. You need to take a minute. You need to study what is going on. How did this occur? understand the scientific, pattern that got you where you are. And it's not just one thing. And so just a surgery, chemo, and radiation isn't going to just fix this one thing, because look at the cancer rates. Nixon declared war on cancer in 1970. Here we are in 2026, and trillions of dollars of philanthropic organizations, and we are 1 in 2 cancer and growing. So obviously that isn't working. So like everyone should obviously see that. And if we're building larger and larger billion-dollar hospitals, that is also another sign that things aren't working.
Mm-hmm.
And so, because if we have to build bigger and bigger, huge facilities for sicker and sicker people, that means we're not in the right direction. Okay. And so it's the cognitive dissonance that we have, not only in doctors, but, like I had a family member today come in. She's 23 years old and she has a brain tumor, and she went to like 5 doctors. Luckily, 2 of the doctors said, I think this is what it is. We don't have to do a biopsy. I'm pretty sure it is a glioma, a low-grade glioma. I'm more than happy to watch, because the patient, I don't want to do surgery. I don't want to have this. Let me figure this out. So luckily, she found a doctor after going to many and said, though the doctor said, you know what? I'm going to honor your wishes, and I'm going to watch you. I'm going to still watch you, but I'm going to honor and listen to you. Where the other doctor said, no, get up right now, schedule surgery, get it done right now, and so forth. And we can't use fear and intimidation, because that is not a good treatment plan at all. And so how do we, because, you're thinking the same way, and like my patients are, and my community is, but what can we do to really like create this contagious revolution? That's what needs to happen.
It's a good question. I think it starts with individuals who are taking responsibility for their health,
right,
and don't want to blame everything on others, and don't want to exclusively rely on authority figures for every answer. And as we do that, it's like a grassroots movement where people in our families see that we're doing it.
Yes,
and then we model for it, because I don't think it will come from the top down. There's too much financial incentive for that not to happen.
Yeah, too many acronyms.
Those organizations and government regulatory agencies and all the pharmaceutical industry, they benefit when people are continually sick. If there were a way to get people healthy where they got off of pills or off of treatments, that would hurt their business model.
Right.
It doesn't require any conspiracy, but it's important to understand that these are perverse incentives in the industry. So we shouldn't expect that those agencies and corporations are going to be very proactive in this. So it's going to take the patients themselves and families to start thinking critically. And like you say, looking at overall lifestyle, what is happening in your life? And that can be a tricky one for people, because we tend to have a materialistic perspective, which is that if there's something physical in my body, there must be something that's exclusively physical as the cause. And certainly there are physical things. We know that. Yeah. If you drink poison, you're going to get sick. We know that. But there are also things happening that we don't fully understand. So I mentioned before the Institute of Noetic Sciences, where I'm a board member. They have the largest annotated bibliography of spontaneous remissions, where
I always use this example with patients.
A cancer disappears and there's no explanation. We need to understand that. And people can say, well, those are anomalies. No. If that happened one time, there's something we don't understand about the human body. My favorite case is Anita Morjani, very famous woman who she was dying of cancer, tumors all over her body. And while she was in a coma, basically like dying, she had a near-death experience. So her consciousness went to these other realms. She encountered her deceased father, reconciled things with him, realized her lack of self-love. And upon coming back into her body and being resuscitated, basically, her tumors disappeared. And she's now very healthy and speaking all over the world. That she had a shift in her consciousness. Something about the way she perceived the world around her and herself shifted her physical body. So I think once we acknowledge that possibility, that something non-physical can affect our physical body, then we start thinking, what's going on in my relationships? Am I really, really angry about this situation and I stay in it? Is something happening at work? Does that correlate with my symptoms in any way? And you start to ask those questions beyond, of course, you want to look at what am I eating? How much am I sleeping? All that stuff too.
Yeah.
But think about the things that are less tangible also. Can we correlate things happening in our life that we might not want to acknowledge that relate somehow to our symptoms? That gets really big because then you can take responsibility and make actual changes.
Right. Well, explain to our listeners, though, consciousness, because I don't think most people know. And I think for me, it's probably the most powerful pharmacy you have.
Mhm. Yeah. Consciousness is perhaps impossible to define because it's not something physical that we can point to. But I like to think about it as the part of us that's experiencing in this moment. So it's the part of us that, when I say that I have a thought, what is the I that has a thought, that is hearing or seeing or thinking about the thought? There's some awareness, some experiencing part of us that exists. And the way that we orient that consciousness, the way that we orient our mind in our life, whether we're deciding that we're going to focus on the positive thoughts versus the negative ones, whether we're going to decide to have this job or this relationship or that one. These are things happening in a very abstract way within our own consciousness. So it's getting really in touch with ourself, basically. It's almost like if you close your eyes and thought about, well, what is the thing that's aware right now? There's a part of you that's constantly aware. And what is that awareness doing in your life? So what I found, and this goes back to my first book, there's actual research that with shifts in your consciousness, the physical world changes, sometimes
Yeah.
in very subtle ways. In the classic study, this was done at Princeton and many other places, where there's a machine called a random number generator. So this is a
Mhm.
machine that will generate ones and zeros in a random fashion. And when you let the machine run for a long time, there are roughly 50% ones and 50% zeros. Even if it's not 1 0 1 0 1 0 in that sequence, it might be 1 1 1 1 1 0 0 1 1 1 1 1, but it will approach 50% ones and 50% zeros in the long run because it's random.
Mhm. Okay.
So what the researchers ask people to do is they say, I want you, and this is a person not claiming to have any special abilities. It's usually a college student. They'll say, I want you to try to affect the behavior of this machine, make it produce more ones than zeros with your mind. And they're able to do this. If we look at the statistics, the machines behave non-randomly when people are trying to alter the machines. What's interesting about these studies, though, is that there's a trend in performance. When the person starts off, they think, well, this is crazy. I'm not going to be able to alter this
Right.
machine. So they're relaxed and it's kind of playful and their performance is really good. And then they see that their performance is strong and they start overthinking and the performance goes down. So there's something about being in flow. But in any event, these studies show, and this is within a category that Dr. Dean Radin puts in the 6 sigma category, meaning that the odds against chance that this is happening is more than 1 billion to 1. So there's something happening statistically speaking. The person's mind seems to be having an effect on a physical system. Mind affecting matter. Think about that in the realm of biology and human health. If the mind can affect a random number generator for someone who has no practice in it, what is happening all the time in terms of what's happening within our own consciousness relative to what's happening in our body? It's something to start paying attention to.
Right. Well, I always say to patients, the mind is in the body's in the mind.
Hmm.
And you
Yeah.
become what you think about most of the time. So if you think, oh, I'm invincible, unstoppable, limitless, that's what you become. And it's interesting because I always tell the practitioners, like, we have to declare victory on all of our patients. It's always, there's always, it's always should be good and declaratory how great and wonderful they are. And if we have something, like you have challenges, okay? You don't have problems, but you have challenges. And challenges become blessings because you're looking for solutions, right?
Yeah.
And so I have to reframe patients, like all the time. Like one of my patients, the husband came in and he goes, oh, I'm so just worried to death about my wife. And she's sitting right there. She bawls crying. It goes clear that how a profound effect he was having. So I had to have a talk with him and say, no, you're so blessed to get to do what you get to do. And you have to look at your wife like this is a project and that you two are doing together. And you're just getting better and better every day in every way. So, because I said, see what the words that you said had profound effect on your wife, who is stage 4 breast cancer with multiple sclerosis, another layer. And so, anyway, so it's we have to be very careful. You know, what do they say, that the life is in the power of the tongue, you know, and that is real. And we don't think about that. Because years ago, I was on a hike in Grand Canyon, and this doctor who doesn't practice this kind of medicine, but he was in rehabilitative medicine. And so he goes, well, how would you summarize your practice? And I said, that love is the medicine for everything. And it's true. Love covers all faults, right? And if we just would treat our fellow man, and whatever we are doing in life is just love people. And there's probably nothing more powerful than that. And we've got to get over all of this like destructive discord that we have with humanity, and say, like, how can we elevate this person today? Any person you meet, how can we make this better person better today? Because then you both win.
Right.
So, and so I I ponder, because like you're probably from a different viewpoint, because I'm a practicing physician, and I'm trying to, really awaken humans every day. You're doing it another way. And I think you're right, a grassroots movement, like, just really, if you change, I always tell people, if we change one person, we've done a lot.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think if we just continually, I don't know if you've read the book, The Secret of Life.
I've not.
Okay. So this book was written by Dr. Lakowski, who was a French oncologist. And when I read that book, I don't know how many years ago, but you were talking earlier about how everyone is able to transmit and receive energy, all living creatures. So if you look at the dolphins and how to, all the, and look how animals know, they know what's going on because they perceive. And so we need to be broadcasting every day more positive thoughts, feelings, and beliefs. And that's how you can change yourself and change your loved ones. And I tell patients that have children and grown children, it could be young children too, like I go, okay, no, if you want to talk to your child, you just do it, not on a text, not on a call, just with your brain, transmit them love, how much you love them, how much you want them to have wisdom, clarity, and discernment in their life, et cetera, et cetera. And it happens. And a patient told me, she goes, Dr. Kinley, I did exactly. She had triple negative breast cancer. And she was like worried to death about her grown boys. And I said, you have grown boys and you're worried about them? I said, didn't you taught them how to be men? One's in military, so he obviously knows. And I said, you need to say how great they are. And I said, I want you to start sending information through the airwaves with your brain. And then she told me last time, she goes, oh my God, Dr. Kinley, you're right. My son, he told me, Mom, I feel you. I don't know what's going on, but Mom, I feel your whatever. He's in wherever he is. He's, in training, not in training, but in combat somewhere, wherever it is. And so he says, like, I feel you. I know. And then she didn't tell him, she just said, sweetheart, I love you. You're amazing. I think you're great, etc. So if we would all, I think, practice that, then we would be open to one another's ideas and innovations and transformations of whatever we need, not just in the human frame, but in world in general. But health, we're at a critical point in health now, because the CDC says that 77% of the population is sick, and they underestimate. So that number is much larger. And so we all need to do this individually and collectively because a lot of what's out there, like if you look at medical treatments, they have efficacious a nature of maybe 10%, 5%, 11%. I mean, very low amount. Okay. If you look at the statistics, it's very, very low what works and what doesn't work, whether it's blood pressure medicine, whatever medicine. Okay. And if it worked, why are we still getting sick? And why are they still on 5 or 10 medications? Okay. And I do sense, though, that people are starting, doctors even, because now when patients come and see me, look, let Dr. Keneally, do it. I respect what's going on, even though some of them don't even know me. But like, I share everything, I send them everything, whatever I need to do. And I think it's becoming much more receptive, now.
Yeah.
And because they don't have answers, if you've got a patient with stage 4 cancer, like, you better say, look, let's just try anything and everything, right?
Yeah.
And so I do see an opening, right? And now with all, like you said, podcast and all the information now that's out there, and COVID really, really made everybody question what is going on and what's not going on. So now there's definitely an absolute desire to keep looking for information and questioning everything. So should we take questions and everything? What do we have to do?
I think everybody's been pretty fascinated with the chat. No one's talking.
Oh, is that?
Can I add a point here?
Yeah.
This notion of the importance of the energy that we're giving and the words and the thoughts that we have. There's a related concept, which is looking at our suppressed emotions and perhaps unprocessed trauma. Because if those suppressed emotions exist or there's trauma that's not being acknowledged, that can lead us into patterns where we're more negative because we haven't addressed the root cause of our negativity. And that can be a very uncomfortable process to go into grief that has never been expressed.
Right.
You need to cry. Yeah.
And you can't do that by yourself, because if you know the work of that German New Medicine,
Yes,
Dr. Hammer, and who a lot of people, whatever they think, whatever we all think about different people, they always think. But, if people know his work, and I talk about it in my first book, and I talked about him, how, he unresolved emotional conflict becomes stored in the body. And so you're right. And a thought becomes a thing. And you're right. And I always tell people, like, you don't know, I started doing spiritual emotional work on myself 30 years ago. And it completely catapulted me and upgraded me to where I am today. I wouldn't be where I am today. And then I took that work and then did another thing. And then I did, and I'm constantly looking for an upgrade. Okay. Like, how do I get there? And so I've done all these different, so many different things, because I find that is what so elevates the physical biochemical aspect of ourselves, is that.
right.
And and you think you're done, there's no finish line. Your health is never over. Enlightenment path is never over. And we always think, oh no, I've already done that before. I don't need to do a new thing. Well, no, we do. We do need, we need to take a new path. We need to take a new hike. Doing the same hike all the time, you got that. But if you go to a new hike, if you go to a new hike, like, your nervous system is different. It's got to think about things. It's got to, really look at it differently. That's why you're not supposed to do the same things all the time over and over.
Right.
You want to change it up to, to create neural growth patterns. So I'm excited, literally, because I feel like for the first time that what I've been doing has been vindicated, sort of. It's like, okay, I was on the rat path. It just took 40 years.
You're a pioneer.
So, and I just thought, but I never thought what I was doing was special. Okay, I just knew, okay, no, this is the way to do it.
Right.
I didn't think, like, I didn't question myself. Is this going to work? Is this okay? I don't know. Like, I go read the science. I always read the science because that's how my brain works. I mean, I can't help but think that way. But then I go, sometimes you just have to like see, you never know, right? I mean,
Yeah.
medication is not 100%. I mean, if you give a blood pressure medicine, there's no guarantee the blood pressure is going to lower it, right?
Right.
So you think whether you're experimenting with red light or infrared sauna or a drug, I mean, they all may work, but you don't try it and do it because fortunately now we have so much scientific validation of different things now today that people do think is woo-woo, you
Yeah.
know? So like pulsed electromagnetic field, people think that, but there's over 1,000 PubMed studies on it. Okay. And the most important thing though is every individual is an original. And so we have to focus on restoring homeostasis in the human miracle.
Yeah.
And the biggest thing I see today is our petri dish today is unfavorable. Okay. Not that I go out every day and go, oh my God, it's terrible pollution in the air, because we've had air pollution for a while. But it's like, okay, how do I upgrade myself so that is not an issue for me, And so, because there's a lot of things like I said earlier, a lot of self-care you could do that's very easy to do and implement in your daily life to make sure and ensure that good process. And in self-care, the spiritual, emotional countenance has to be given attention. Just as much as the exercise and the physical, like you were saying, a lot of times you may have an unresolved emotional conflict, but that needs to be addressed, and you just don't know it. That's why you've got to have an outside person who cares about you, loves you, and can say, oh, because it's interesting when I get a husband and wife come in, and let's just say the wife is the patient, and I'll say, okay, so tell me about your stress for the past 10 years. And then, well, I had this and I had that. They'll say things. And then I ask the husband, I go, tell me what you think is stressful for your wife. And then it's amazing the interesting info you get. So I said, oh, that's interesting. So I said, so what? Then I asked him, ask the wife, well, what do you think? So we need to be open to the critique of a significant other, a family member, a best friend, or something. And we have to look at it as we are just going to be elevating ourselves.
Because we can't always see everything
from
our own eyes.
We can't. My kids, I have twins that are 31, and they tell me things all the time. And, because now they're geniuses, right? But anyway, I'm being facetious, but I go like, they love me. They know me. They're not telling things to hurt me. They're telling me things that I need to look at. So I take it as very good and constructive, and that they love me. So I look at it as love.
Right. Sometimes the truth is painful but loving.
Yes, exactly. So anyway,
someone asked, can you learn from your past lives? It's kind of fascinating.
Oh, that is a good question. So someone asked, can you learn from your past lives?
I mentioned earlier the University of Virginia, their Division of Perceptual Studies. Dr. Ian Stevenson was a psychiatrist there. And in the 1960s, he started looking at cases of children who were talking about a life that is not their own. And sometimes he was able to find historical records validating what the children said. In some cases, also, he was finding that the children had birthmarks and or physical deformities that corresponded with the death in the alleged previous life. And he would find a person that actually died in the manner described by the child, with birthmarks corresponding with exit and entry wounds from bullets and other things like that.
Wow.
So what he said in his book is that traditionally in medicine, we believe that genetics and environment are the two things that are affecting the physical body. But I'm finding now there's a third factor.
Yes. Well, I know, you know, Gabor Mate.
Mhm.
Okay. So it was that we inherited 5 generations of emotional DNA besides hair, skin, and eye color and all the other stuff. But now he says that it's 15 generations of, emotional DNA. So you're right. So there is something to, you know, past, the people before us.
Yeah. I mean, I think to me they're distinct categories. They're because in the studies at the University of Virginia, they're looking at children who are talking about a life that has nothing to do with their ancestral lineage. And so that's one thing, which some would call a past life or other life. Then there is the ancestry, which I think is super important as well, in the work of Bert Hellinger and family constellation
Yes.
and the field of epigenetics, that
Yes.
we are carrying things energetically that are affecting our life that we're not aware of. So I think these are all important avenues. We need to look closely at our life, but sometimes this life is being informed by some other life energetically. That if
Right.
we can get to the root cause there, it could help us in our own life.
Well, that's why, the work of Dr. Hammer, I took, I started taking the courses they started having. So he taught a French guy that's actually in Canada.
Recall healing?
Yes, recall healing. So I took the first course and I was like, whoa, this is outrageous. This is unbelievable. And I go, like, I don't have time to fit it in my visit. So I got to train somebody else. So our staff, do recall healing. But I think it is just absolutely staggering information when you go back through your lineages as much as you can, as much as you can remember.
Yeah.
But all what you want to do is you go back, but you just reframe it into good. And that is what life is all about, is reframing unfavorable emotional conflicts. You're not going to become the problem. You're going to reframe it into good and how it became your advantage. Because do you know Thich Nhat Hanh?
Mm-hmm.
So Thich Nhat Hanh, I listened to him, everything a long time ago. And I remember cassette tapes and I was listening and he taught how to turn negative seeds into positive seeds. And everybody has negative seeds. So it's okay. Like people think, oh my God, there's something wrong with me. Well, of course, everybody has flaws, right? Everyone's flaws. And so and it changed my whole life, like how like the negative things became my superpower. But that's how you have to look at it.
Yeah.
You've got to get there. Okay. Right?
Pain and suffering
Yes,
can be our biggest teachers.
it's really the only teacher. So that's what I try to teach patients. I mean, I'm taking care of them, but I feel like I'm taking care of, spiritual, mental, and physical because it's all flowing together.
Yes.
And so I can't, yes, I'm going to talk about the scans and the blood work and all that. But that's all things that can be changed. And I always point out, oh, look at all the good here. Look at all this good. We have this one little thing. Oh, that we can take care of that. So, but what I find that is stress and in unresolved emotional trauma and drama and conflict is what is the biggest deterrent in disease. And so that's why we do emotional work on everyone. Okay. And whether you come here for your physical, you get emotional work.
That's the way it should be.
It's the way it should be. Exactly.
Thank you for doing it.
Yeah. And so, and people really tell me, how much it has helped them and changed them and everything. And that's why I keep doing what I'm doing, because it is so powerful. And I want medicine to be like this. This is the way medicine needs to be. The olden days were the good old days when doctors sat down. Now doctors sit down with their computer, ask you a bunch of questions, fill out all the computer. Okay, anything else? See you later. Bye. That is not medicine, okay? And so the doctor means to teach. And so you want to teach patients how to take care of themselves so they don't need you, except for once a year,
Right.
So any other questions, Ryan?
Someone asked what was the name of the podcast that Mark talked about at the beginning that he listened to from start to finish?
What was the name of the podcast?
It's called Healing Powers,
Uh-huh.
hosted by Laura Powers. And when I first listened, it was 2016. There are many more episodes. I haven't listened quite as diligently since then. So I was the 2011 to 2016 era is what I did a quick binge of that because the episodes are pretty short. And that led me to a lot of other areas.
So what are you, so kind of what's your next, purpose?
I don't know exactly. I think my overall purpose is to try to become the best version of me and doing all that emotional work on myself, because when I do that, then I'm able to help the world and help other people around me in better ways. But I'm not working on another book. I'm always curious about the nature of reality. What is this place? Who are we? Why are we here?
Mm-hmm.
And that is a full-time job.
Yeah, right. That's awesome. That's really good. So you're not working for any organization or anything?
No, I'm on the board of Institute of Noetic Sciences, which is a nonprofit organization. So I'm a volunteer board member there, but I'm not.
Oh, that's great.
I'm a solo practitioner, I guess, just doing what interests me.
Oh, that's awesome. That's really, really good. Well, I so appreciate you being part of our mission here, which is kind of part of your mission in a different way.
Yeah.
And I'm fascinated by all the books that you've written. Everyone can read on all of his books. Like you've written 7 books, right?
Correct.
And so, start wherever your interest is. But it can be life changing. I think I made all of my practitioners read your Upside Down Medicine book. And so, because we need to constantly open our minds and think of all the different possibilities and not work in construct, look at infinite possibilities.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah. So that's good. So you helped me open my eyes to, new ways of thinking. Even though I might have heard of things, it's like another way of looking at things. So I appreciate your work and your transformation and you sharing your transformation with all of us. So
thank you so much.
So thank you guys for being part of Perfectly Healthy. And if there's anything that we can do to upgrade your life on a spiritual, emotional, or physical level, please don't hesitate to contact us. We're more than happy to answer questions, concerns, or just come by and visit. And Mark, we're inviting you to come and visit when you're around visiting your parents. So
thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.